Imagine this, a windowless chamber somewhere in the frozen wastelands of northern Asia. White walls splattered with something that used to be human. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead, buzzing like a swarm of flies. In the center of the room lies a figure that doesn't even look human anymore. Flesh peeled, skin turned gray, eyes bulging, and a jaw that won't close because every tooth has been filed into a crude weapon. This wasn't a battlefield. It wasn't a torture chamber run by criminals. It was an experiment, organized, funded, and recorded by men in white coats with notebooks. And the survivors. They didn't want freedom. They begged to be locked inside again. This is the story of what some call the most brutal human experiment ever attempted. Part 1. Setting the Trap. In the late 1940s, as the dust of World War II settled, nations weren't just racing for nuclear weapons. They were racing for control of the human body and mind. Germany had experimented with methamphetamine, dosing soldiers with Pervitin, which turned ordinary men into sleepless killing machines during the Blitzkrieg. The Americans and British had their own stimulant, Benzedrine, handed out like candy to bomber crews who had to stay awake for 36 hours at a time. But the Soviets? They wanted something worse, something stronger, something that could not just keep men awake, but reshape what it meant to be human. The result was a program so secret that not even the KGB admitted its files existed. A program whispered about in old military archives under a code name, Project Somnus. The idea was horrifyingly simple. Seal human test subjects in a controlled chamber. Expose them to a specially engineered gas meant to prevent sleep for 30 days straight. Record what happens when the human mind is forced beyond its natural breaking point. 5 test subjects were chosen. Prisoners of war. Men with no family, no hope, and no rights. They were promised one thing: survive 30 days without sleep and earn your freedom. What could possibly go wrong? Part 2. The first days. For the first 3 days, everything looked normal. The men laughed, shared stories, ate their rations. They joked about what they'd do when they walked free. A researcher monitoring the room through thick glass remarked to another, "Look at them. Strong, full of spirit. The West has no idea what kind of supermen we're creating." But on day 4, the cracks began to show. The conversations turned darker. Prisoners muttered about nightmares from the war, whispering things they'd never admitted before. On day 5, one man began pacing nonstop, muttering under his breath. Another sat perfectly still for hours, staring into the corner. The scientists told themselves it was just stress, nothing unusual, but they kept the gas pumping. By day 9, everything broke. Part 3. The screams. At exactly 2:13 a.m., one prisoner erupted in shrieks so loud they shattered the microphone inside the chamber. He clawed at his throat until blood ran down his chest. His vocal cords tore, leaving him wheezing like a broken accordion. Then, silence. The cameras showed shadows moving, but no clear shapes. The oxygen monitor said all 5 were alive. Yet when researchers spoke into the intercom, no one responded. Finally, on day 15, they opened the chamber, and what they saw has been described, by the few who dared write about it, as a vision of hell itself. Part 4. The horror within. One man was dead, or half dead. His chest cavity was ripped open, lungs still pumping as if they were trying to escape his body. The others? They had carved themselves apart, flesh peeled from their arms, their faces stripped of skin, muscle torn from bone. But it wasn't the carnage that terrified the researchers, it was the expressions. They were smiling. Chunks of organs lay neatly arranged on the floor, as if part of a ritual. And when the soldiers tried to pull them out, the survivors fought with inhuman strength. One prisoner ripped out a soldier's throat with his teeth. Another tore a man's groin apart with his bare hands. It took 5 deaths before the remaining 3 subjects were subdued. They were strapped to gurneys, pumped full of morphine, yet still screamed for one thing: give us the gas. Part 5. Madness in the lab. In surgery, one subject resisted anesthesia so violently that his heart stopped under the strain. Another, stitched back together without anesthetic, smiled throughout the procedure and scribbled 2 words on a pad when asked why he wouldn't sleep: keep cutting. Doctors began to whisper. This wasn't human anymore, this was something else. Something born from the absence of sleep, the ripping apart of sanity. The KGB officer in charge made the call. Put them back on the gas. That's the only way to control them. And sure enough, the moment the stimulant hissed back into their lungs, they relaxed. Their eyes rolled back, their breathing steadied. But the EEG monitors told a different story. Brainwaves spiked in patterns never seen before. Bursts of frenzied activity followed by flat lines, as if something inside them was fighting for control. When one researcher finally demanded to know what they were, a prisoner laughed and hissed through blood-coated teeth. We are you. We are the madness inside you all. The thing you lock away when you sleep. We are what waits in the dark. Moments later, the lead scientist emptied a pistol into the subject's chest. Project Somnus was shut down. Files burned. Survivors erased. Or so they claimed. Part 6. Could this be real? So, was this the most brutal human experiment ever conducted? Or just an internet ghost story gone viral? Let's pull the curtain back. The truth is, there's no record of Project Somnus in any official Soviet archive. The story only appears on horror forums and creepypasta websites, with details changing depending on who tells it. And scientifically, it doesn't add up. No drug exists that can keep humans awake for 15 days straight without fatal collapse. Even hardcore methamphetamine binges usually crash after 72 hours. No human could tear out their own organs and keep living. Blood loss and shock would kill them in minutes. And the idea of gas addiction doesn't match any known stimulant. So, case closed, right? Just fiction? Not so fast. Part 7, The Real Monsters. Because while the Russian sleep experiment may be fake, the spirit behind it is horrifyingly real. During World War II, Unit 731 of the Japanese Imperial Army conducted experiments so brutal they make this story seem tame. Prisoners were vivisected alive without anesthesia, frozen to death in frostbite tests, and infected with plague for biological warfare research. The Nazis, too, under Dr. Josef Mengele, performed grotesque experiments on twins, injecting dye into their eyes, sewing them together, and mutilating them in the name of genetics. Even the US has its skeletons. The Tuskegee syphilis study deliberately withheld treatment from African American men for decades just to watch the disease progress. MKUltra pumped civilians with LSD to see if their minds could be broken and rebuilt. So, while the sleep experiment may be a myth, the reality is far more terrifying. Humans really have done things just as brutal, if not worse. Part 8, Why the Story Endures. Why do we keep retelling this legend? Why does the Russian sleep experiment, despite being debunked, remain one of the internet's most popular horror stories? Because it speaks to a primal fear. The fear of losing control of our own minds. The fear of the monster inside us. The idea that beneath the surface of sanity, we are all one missed night of sleep away from madness. The final words of the story capture that perfectly. We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free. It doesn't matter if it's fact or fiction. The horror is the same. Conclusion, the real brutality. So, was this the most brutal human experiment ever? In reality, no. It was a story, bloody, messy, and poorly written in parts, but one that struck a chord worldwide. But the brutal truth? Humanity has already proven capable of horrors far worse than fiction. Whether it was in Siberian bunkers, Nazi death camps, or secret CIA black sites, the line between science and sadism has always been frighteningly thin. And maybe that's why we tell these stories. Not because they happened, but because deep down, we know they could. Because the real monster has never been gas or drugs or secret experiments. The real monster has always been us.